What happened to the class clown after graduation? When I think about the idea of a class clown, one face immediately comes to mind: Marcus. If you went to my high school, you couldn't have missed him. He wasn't just the kid who made occasional jokes or pulled little pranks. Marcus was the kind of person who made an entire room shift the moment he walked in. He had this mix of mischief and charm that teachers couldn't fully hate, and students couldn't help but love. He was the guy who could imitate every teacher's voice so perfectly that people begged him to do it at lunch. The guy who could turn a boring announcement into a comedy sketch. The guy who could diffuse tension in the room just by saying something so ridiculous that everyone burst out laughing. What made Marcus different from the average funny kid was that he wasn't mean. His jokes weren't about tearing people down. He had an instinct for humor that united people instead of dividing them. Even teachers, who often rolled their eyes when he interrupted class, sometimes fought back smiles when he nailed one of his one-liners. There was this math teacher who was notorious for being stone-faced and serious, and one day Marcus raised his hand and asked, completely deadpan, "Excuse me, but if we're calculating how many pizzas could fit inside this triangle, are we assuming thin crust or deep dish?" The teacher tried to keep it together, but she cracked a grin, and for weeks after that, people still brought up the pizza triangle. That was Marcus in a nutshell, someone who could make even the most rigid adult forget themselves for a moment. But Marcus wasn't an academic star. He barely passed some of his classes, and he didn't play sports, so he wasn't a traditional school hero. Humor was his thing, and everyone assumed it was just part of his teenage personality. People joked all the time that he'd be a comedian or an actor someday, but there was also this unspoken assumption that he'd eventually grow out of it, that he'd settle into some normal life, maybe working in retail or doing construction, and just be the funny guy people remembered from high school. After graduation, that seemed to be exactly what happened. While people went off to college or started careers, Marcus stayed quiet. No big college acceptance posts, no glamorous job updates. Someone said he was working at a gas station. Someone else said they saw him at a grocery store cracking jokes behind the register. For a while, it felt like he just faded into the background of adult life. It was almost disappointing. Like, really? The funniest guy in school just became another person stocking shelves? But then I stumbled across him again in the most unexpected way. I was scrolling YouTube one night, half bored, clicking random videos, and there he was. The thumbnail was grainy, but I recognized his face instantly. He was on stage at a tiny comedy club, holding a microphone, sweat glistening under cheap stage lights, and even though the video only had a couple hundred views, I clicked it. The moment he started talking, it was like being transported back into high school. The same rhythm, the same timing, the same way of pulling people in and making them feel like they were part of the joke. Some of the material was rough, some jokes didn't land, but the core of what made him funny was all still there, just raw and unpolished. I couldn't believe it. While the rest of us were moving into stable jobs and degrees, Marcus was actually doing the thing we all joked he'd do. He was chasing comedy. And it wasn't just a one-time video either. His channel had a handful of clips from open mic nights, small shows, little bar gigs. He wasn't famous, but he was trying, and you could see him slowly getting better. The real confirmation of his progress came at our 5-year reunion. Walking into the event, there was all the usual awkwardness. People comparing jobs, talking about who was engaged, who was still in school. Then Marcus showed up. Same grin, same energy, but now he had stories. Not just high school stories, but road stories, comedy stories. He talked about bombing on stage in front of 12 drunk people in some dive bar, and he told it so vividly that the entire reunion was in stitches. He said he'd been invited to open for a comedian who actually had a name, and that alone made him the most interesting person in the room. What hit me hardest was something he said when people asked if he thought he'd make it big. Marcus laughed and said, "I don't know if I'll ever be famous, but if I can make 50 strangers laugh in a dark room on a Thursday night, that's enough for me. That's still living my dream." And hearing that was kind of profound, because for most of us, the dream shrinks as we get older. We adjust, we compromise, we stop chasing it. Marcus hadn't. He was still the class clown, but now he was clowning on his own terms, in front of people who wanted to be there, people who paid to laugh. Now, years later, he's not a household name, but he's not invisible either. He has a modest online following, he tours smaller comedy clubs, and every once in a while one of his clips goes viral. He makes enough to live, and he seems happy. And whenever I see his stuff pop up online, it always makes me smile. Because while the rest of us blended into adulthood, Marcus took the thing everyone thought was just a phase and built his life around it. So what happened to the class clown after graduation? In our case, he never stopped being funny. He just found a bigger audience than a high school classroom. And honestly, that's the most fitting ending imaginable.